before I get too far into this, we're taking this thing down to the studs. So maybe you're brand new to fantasy football. If so, welcome aboard and thank you for choosing us as your podcast. Maybe you just get a little bit too into the weeds sometimes and you want to take a step back and kind of take this thing down to the basics. Either way, I think it's important to kick off with number one on this list. Understand your league scoring. It is so simple, almost to the point of being silly to talk about. But every year, I've been guilty of it. 100% I've been guilty of it. I'm in a lot of leagues, a lot of different variety of leagues. Sometimes I don't just do the standard issue thing of looking at the scoring settings and saying, how many points do they get for a reception? Are there any bonuses in this league, right? If they burst off a 30-yard run, does that give them a bonus as opposed to just doing a 10-yard run? Do tight ends get a little something extra in this league? Do quarterbacks get a little something extra in this league? There are multitudes of varieties of fantasy football formats at this point. If you do a standard league, great. But just know that you are in a standard league before you start drafting and before you get into the mud. How many running backs do you have to start in your lineup every week? How many flex spots are available, right? Do those flex spots limit you to just running backs and wide receivers? Or can you flex a tight end? Or is it this magical realm of super flex where now you can flex a quarterback in that spot as well? This stuff has massive implications for how your players actually perform. And you don't want to figure this thing out halfway through your draft.
Nope.
After the draft, week 6, that's not the time to be taking a peek at these things. So very simple, very basic, but so necessary.
I know I've entered some leagues and not paid attention, and it's like, oh crap, what did I do? People just want to join leagues and they're fun and yeah, whatever. They're all basically the same. Well, it's the same as in it's fantasy football, but that can be about where it ends.
And I get it, by the way. Reading, who wants to do all that, right? It's like going through the terms and conditions when you sign up for a new app. Nobody wants to scroll through all that junk, but if you don't, you could find yourself in some pretty uncomfortable circumstances.
Number 2, it's don't worry about bye weeks. Whether it's redraft, dynasty, doesn't matter. It's 1 week out of the year. If all your players are on bye, well, that week you're going to lose. That kind of puts you in an advantage when it comes to having these bye weeks with your league mates, if all of them happen to be on one. Now, do I go out of my way to plan on having all my players on the same bye week? No. But if it just actually happens that way, it's like, okay, it happens. My only caveat with this, and again, it kind of goes back to what you were saying in the first point there with your league settings, is depending on when your fantasy playoffs start, you want to make sure that, if there's late bye weeks in the NFL, that doesn't coincide with the start of the fantasy playoffs. I know we had that issue a couple seasons ago. It threw the fantasy world into just, a Twitter because we didn't know what to do with ourselves. So that's the only caveat with that. But like I said, if you know what your league settings are, it's not a problem. But otherwise, yeah, don't worry about it. I think people put too much stock in that and they worry too much about having too many players on bye. It's like, no, everyone's going to have players on bye. It doesn't matter in the end. Just draft good players. And that's about it.
I'm of the mind you can use bye weeks as tiebreakers if you want. You're between two players. You go, I don't know which one to draft. If you want to look at the rest of your roster and say, where's the bye week come into play? I'm fine with that. Just don't go crazy. Now, Dustin, this next one, step number 3, do research, but do just enough research to feel comfortable. Don't overload yourself, especially if you're newer to fantasy football. And yes, you want to know what you're doing. You want to have a general understanding. Like I said, look at the league scoring. Great. Check out bye weeks. If you're into that, fine. Understand which players you want to go after, who you value more than you don't. What is your favorite analyst looking to do? How much do you want to follow them? do some research. I'm not advocating for going into your drafts or your season completely blind, although sometimes that can be fun. Probably not the best way to win your league, but it can be fun. Not everybody has to look at these crazy detailed metrics. There's a metric for everything in fantasy football, almost at this point in time. Some of these advanced metrics, these advanced statistics can be useful. They can be helpful if you know how to use them. I don't know how to use like half of them, I'll be honest. So I, either ignore those ones because there's nothing worse than using information wrongly. I'd rather not use the information at all. Or I rely on the very smart people who do understand them to tell me what I should know and take from those.
I want to talk rookies a little bit here. Running backs and quarterbacks, they can be useful early and right out of the gate. I shouldn't say avoid rookie wide receivers and tight ends. Just don't plan on them being very viable to start the year. Are there always exceptions to that rule? Yes. You have your Jamar Chase or your Garrett Wilson or, Chris Olave last year. But you should know those guys are stepping into a stud role or the number one role on their team. The rest of those guys that we love, like your, Zay Flowers this year or Jackson Smith and Jigba. We love all these guys. They're the hot names. But chances are they're not going to produce right out of the gate. What we've seen historically is that as the year goes on, they get more acclimated with the NFL, more familiar with the playbook. Then later in the season, you can kind of count on them more often. So just know if you're going to be drafting your rookie wide receivers or tight ends, you're probably going to have to stash them on your bench for a good chunk of the season. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Just be ready to hold on to them for the long haul and not drop them to the waiver wire after the first couple weeks when they're not doing anything. You may regret that later. Now, running backs, a rookie running back can just pop into a role and will have that legitimate usage and get that work. So running backs, okay. Wide receivers, tight ends, just pump the brakes a little bit and know that they're probably not going to be starting for you on your team right away when the season starts.
Per tip number 5, I'm going to take the safety at the front of the drafts and upside in the back. Let's call this the Mullet Rule. Safety at the front, upside in the back. What that means is in your first few rounds of any draft, you're probably not going to win your draft necessarily in those first few rounds, but you can damn sure lose it.
And I've got a perfect example for this, Jake. This was probably back in 2012, 2013. It was right after Michael Vick had that incredible season, his resurgence after being suspended. And I had that following season, I had the number 1 pick in the draft. And this is before I knew better. I was still young in my fantasy football days here. And I took Michael Vick first overall. I'm like, he was the cheat code last year. Like, he did so amazing, severely underperformed. And basically, I was screwed right out of the gate because he did not return that value, or not even close. So yes, you can lose your draft in those early rounds.
I've been there myself. In the Le'Veon Bell holdout year, took Le'Veon Bell at like the 5 spot in the first round of the draft. Going, what's the worst that could happen? He holds out a couple of weeks, then he comes back week 3, right? You hold this guy on your bench for a couple of weeks, but I know he's coming back, and when he does, he'll win my league. Instead, Le'Veon Bell did not play a snap of football that year. Luckily, I had picked up his backup in the tail end of the drafts, but still, that move was horrible for my season because it wasn't a safe move at all. In the back part of your draft, middle rounds, late rounds, you take all of the crazy hype players that you want that have maybe not a solid, what we call floor, right? A reasonable floor of production that they shouldn't go below. If you want to shoot for the moon with those guys, I think you do that all day long.
Do you do the finger guns with that too? Every time
I click it. Every single time. In fact, I'm so busy doing the finger guns a lot of the time that I don't actually click the button, and sometimes it auto drafts for me. That's a risky take, but it's worth it because when those guys when they hit, it's so vital for your team. But again, deal with that crap in the later part of your draft. Get nuts in the later part of your draft. Don't do that at the start because it's the fastest way to crater your start to the fantasy football season. So take the guys you know are going to be productive, are going to be safe. Obviously, anybody can get injured. Weird shit happens. But in general, you tend to know who the safe players are going into your draft.
All right, number 6. This one is more dynasty related. Don't worry about setting a lineup in the offseason. If you're going out and making trades or you're drafting rookies in your rookie draft every year, don't worry about looking at your lineup and filling those holes. Just draft best player available, trade for good players. If someone offers you a trade, say you're wide receiver heavy and they offer you another wide receiver, it's like, yeah, maybe I don't need this, but I can always trade them later. Just one trade doesn't mean you're done unless you're in our home league. But but otherwise, yeah, just use that trade and then trade the player away. Or if you like that player, trade, another wide receiver in this example away. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, just get good players on your team and worry about filling those roster holes as the season gets closer to starting. Just don't worry about your lineup in the offseason. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just try to get better players on your team because those are just chips to be traded away later if needed.
Maximum value. That's all it's about. So I've done it before where I've taken a position down to the studs during this part of the offseason. I've been like, well, I'm not going to have a tight end at this point. I'll trade off somebody who values, the tight ends that I do have, maybe because there's camp hype that comes out. There's blurbs, right? This time of the year, there's always a blurb about a player that offers a sell window, a trade window for them. So I'll do that, and I'll deal with getting that spot filled the week before. Maybe that means I even have to pay up a tiny bit at that point. I'm fine with it because in the long haul, I think you get way more value doing that. Now, here's where we get emotional. Here's where I get emotional, Dustin, because it's very easy in fantasy football to have rooting interests and to love certain players, whether it's because they're on your favorite NFL team or you've just had them on your previous team so often that you get enamored with them. They've done great things for you in the past, right? It's easy to get attached. Rule number 7, don't get too attached to your players. Never get too attached. We want to appreciate them for what they've done. We want to keep it objective, though, right? We want to look backwards and understand what they did 2, 3, 4 years ago, even last year sometimes. It was wonderful. It was a great time you had together. It doesn't mean you've got to stay out with them going forward. And this is even true throughout the course of your year or season. You draft a player. The first 5 weeks, they dominate. They absolutely help you crush your opponent every single week. Right? They're putting up multitudes of points. You get enamored. You're like, you're an every week starter for me now. Never sitting you again because you just have gone off every week. Week 6, that's a kind of a dud week. Week 7, same kind of deal. Week 8, you did a little something there. I'm starting to get nervous about you, though. Week 9, week 10, week 11, nothing is happening. People will be so indebted to these players, so attached to players, they still won't sit them. After all the signs are there, you need to know when to move on from a player. Maybe that doesn't mean dropping them from your team. Maybe it just means sitting them on the bench to let them think about what they've done. Don't get too caught up in that where you stick with a player just because you're used to it.
Once you've drafted your team, draft capital doesn't matter anymore. Then they're just players on your roster. So just because you drafted a player the first round, second round, third round, don't feel like you have to start them every week if they're not performing. You're doing yourself a disservice. So once the draft's over, draft capital does not matter anymore.
The draft is in the past. Your championship's about the future. You got to look to the future.
All right, let's talk waivers a little bit here. It's important to be active on the waivers and however your waiver system is set up. And there's probably a million different ways that waivers run or they can be set up. I think the most common one is the FAB system, where you're allotted a pot of money. You can spend as much as you want on a player any given week. Basically, it's a bid. I want to put $5 of FAB money down. Jake, you're going to put $6 down because you're sure someone's going to put a bid out for them, and it's whoever bids the most money gets that player. So that's how the FAB system works. I know there's other ones, but no matter where you are with your waivers and what system you're using, it's important to stay active out there and read the tea leaves, especially with players that are coming off of injury. Say they're injured to start the season and they're coming off the PUP list. If they're suspended for a certain number of games, maybe snag them a week or two early before your other league mates catch on to the hype. So you want to be active, searching for that diamond in the rough. There's usually a way you can flag them and just say, hey, I want to watch this guy. And just put those flags out there so you can have that constant reminder like, oh yeah, I'm keeping an eye on him. And if, they pop off for a couple weeks and the situation looks good, jump on it before the rest of your league mates do. Because that's the way to win your league is really being ahead of the curve when it comes to finding those diamonds on your waiver wire.
And this flows perfectly with two of the other things we've already talked about. It works in conjunction. Don't get attached to your players, right? Because if you keep a guy on your bench or on your roster beyond his expiration, you potentially miss out on these players from waivers that you could be picking up that could be doing much better things for you. And same with the rookies and how you draft them. Drafting a rookie tight end, expecting them to give you fantasy points in week 8. That's great, but you have 7 weeks now where they have to stay put and you don't get to pick up a waiver ad. You don't get a splurge on your FAB. By the way, one thing to point out with FAB, I think it stands for free agent acquisition budget, I think. But it is a blind bidding competition, so you never know what your league mates are going to do, of course. That's why you have to be a little spendy sometimes, right? Don't restrict yourself too much. Don't tighten the purse string so much that you miss out on players. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't, if there's a guy you want, go get him. Like just spend the money, go get him. Don't think, well, I have to save some money or save these waiver claims for the end of the year. If that's a guy you feel like can really help your team and really help, keep you competitive and help you win that championship, spend all your FAB on him. It doesn't matter. In the end, if that's what it takes to win, it doesn't matter. Will your league mates chastise you a little bit and give you a hard time? Most likely, but that's okay. When you win the championship, you'll be the one laughing all the way to the bank. So it doesn't matter.
Rule 8B. Learn how to talk shit to your league mates and take shit from your league mates. That is Rule 8B. It should honestly be Rule 1 probably. In this thing. It is one of my favorite parts of playing fantasy football. And you have to be willing to take as much as you give. Find the right trade partners in your league and be willing to compromise on trades. It means stepping outside of yourself just a little bit. You know what your team is. You hopefully know what your team needs. Say it's halfway through the season and you go, man, I don't know. These wide receivers just aren't cutting it for me. I need a stud in here, somebody I can rely on every single week. And I don't have that. And I can't find it on waivers right now. Take a look at your league mates' rosters. What do they have? Does somebody out there have an overabundance of receivers? So much so that they can't even start all of the great guys that they have on the roster. They're forced to bench a couple of these dudes every single week. And maybe they don't have a running back that they feel confident in. But you've got a bunch. You've got a gaggle over here of running backs. Same situation. Just do some very simple basic math. Here's what I have. Here's what I need. Here's what they have. Here's what they need. And make your trades make sense. So that's what I mean by finding the right trade partner. And willing to compromise is as simple as this. Not everybody's going to like your trade ideas.
Mm-hmm.
People hate mine most of the time, especially the initial ones. Dustin can attest to this.
Absolutely.
He's been through this with me, right? Hate it. So when they come back, and let's say that they want to counter offer your trade and say, I didn't love that. Here's what I'd like instead. If you throw down the gauntlet and just say out of the bat, it's this or nothing. This is my ideal trade. This is what I want. This is the only thing I'm accepting. You're kind of screwing yourself. You're closing yourself off to your league mates. Nobody's going to want to deal with somebody like that, first of all. If that's the philosophy, you'll probably get no interest and no reciprocity from your league mates. But also, too, you don't have to, what's the phrase, Dustin? Win every trade.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do that. People love to win a trade so that they can talk about it to all of the rest of the league or their friends on social media, post a screenshot. Look at this fucking awesome trade I just did.
How smart I am.
Didn't I absolutely crush this? It's like, yeah, maybe you did. And it's not necessarily something wrong with doing that. But if that's your only goal is to win every trade, you're going to lose out on a lot of potential. I've made some bad starting trades. Drunk, admittedly. But I've made some bad starting trades that ultimately fostered much better trades down the road because people get comfortable with people who are willing to trade, willing to compromise, negotiate, whatever.
In the compromise, like you said, don't be afraid to quote unquote lose the trade. If you have to chip in something a little bit extra to get the deal done, if it's a player you truly believe in, small price to pay to get the guy you want. So don't be afraid to have to put in a little bit extra just to get the guy you want. All right. And then to round this off with the nice number 10, have fun. Fantasy football is supposed to be fun. It's a game we play. It's a game within a game. We're playing a game about the game of NFL football. Like, it's supposed to be fun. Play the game how you want to play it. If there's certain players you want and ADP to be damned, so be it. If you like to make trades because it's fun for you, go ahead and make all the trades. It doesn't matter. Play the game and build your team however you want. This is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to enjoy it. If you just don't care about winning and you just want to be in leagues, just chat with other fantasy players or, the managers of their teams, that's great. That's fine. You don't have to win. It's nice. I would hope most people want to, join leagues to win, get a little cash back, but some people don't. That's okay. Do whatever makes you happy. It's your team. Build it how you want. And end of the day, that's all that matters.